un accent français. Pour mettre les slides, c'est...
Donc ça, c'est toi le...
Hiya guys, sorry we're just about to begin. So everyone just take a seat, I guess. I feel like I'm at the university now with the lecture theatre. Okay, so my name's Patrick McCory and I'm a postdoc at UCL. And today I'm going to present some work that we published at the Bitcoin workshop called Smart Contracts for Bribing Miners. And I did this in collaboration with Alexander Hicks, who's a PhD student at UCL, and Sarah Meiklejohn. So before I talk about bribery, I want to make sure that everyone in the room has the same mental model of a smart contract. I know everyone here is an Ethereum developer and has huge experience with smart contracts, but I want to make sure we're all very consistent. So I like to think of smart contracts as sort of like a trusted third party of a public state, and I've got this little robot to illustrate what a smart contract is. So pretty much a smart contract gives us some guarantees that the code is immutable and can never be modified, that the robot will honestly execute our protocol on our behalf. All execution is atomic, so either the function works or it doesn't work. And finally, that it likes to gossip. It can't keep any secrets. So if I put my date of birth with the smart contract, he's going to tell everybody when I was born. So now we all have a rough idea what a smart contract is. It's this trusted third party. So what's a bribery attack? So if I'm a wealthy adversary and I want to take over the blockchain, maybe I want to censor a transaction, I want to reverse a transaction, or I'm just malice and I want to kill the cryptocurrency altogether. There's two ways where I can do this. My goal is that I need to get over 51% of the network's hash rate. I can either buy hardware, or I can rent hardware from existing miners. So buying hardware is actually really expensive, and there's a really good paper by Joe Banau about that. So in this approach, we're going to rent existing hardware from miners. And there's two ways we can do this. We can either pay the miners inbound, i.e. I create a transaction with a very large transaction fee, and I give that to the miner. And every time the miners do what I want, I'll send a new transaction with a very large fee. Other ways, I can pay them out of band. I mean, if the miners do what I want, I can give them a payment on a different cryptocurrency, or I can give them a bank transfer. And once the briber has control of over 51% of the network's hash rate, he can then perform these attacks. Now, I'm sure people in the room are wondering, bribery, I mean, why would miners ever do this? Is this really a realistic attack? So hopefully I can motivate that a little bit. So mining is actually an example of the tragedy of the commons. If you consider the entire set of miners, they all have a long-term interest, they have an interest in the long-term health of the system. But in the short term, miners may deviate from their mining strategy in order to boost their short-term profits. So that could be some type of selfish mining. And really, have we seen this in practice today? So I'm going to go a bit Bitcoin-centric for the next few slides, because there's been a lot of drama this year. So as most people are aware, I mean, we have Bitcoin Cash that emerged. And Bitcoin Cash modified their mining algorithm a little bit. So sometimes it became really easy to mine Bitcoin or Bitcoin Cash blocks. And what actually happened was that sometimes it was more profitable to mine Bitcoin Cash than it was Bitcoin. And what we've seen was miners jumping back and forth depending on which chain was more profitable than mine. So that gives you a really good illustration that miners are after short-term profit. But now, as we can see, they are mining Bitcoin in the long term, so that strategy of the commons has actually played out in real life. And another question is, has bribery already happened? Have miners been bribed in the past? And there's no concrete evidence, but this was a CoinDesk article by Jimmy Song, who's a core developer, and he alluded to the fact that Bitcoin Cash miners might be accepting a bribe out of band in order to mine Bitcoin Cash. So we have some allegations that bribery is happening already, but it's not detectable. And of course, if we're going to actually have any bribery attacks, we need to have some wealthy adversary who's going to fund the attack. And this was roughly, I think, February 2017, when Bitcoin Unlimited or Bitcoin XT was, gaining some momentum. And this miner, he owned BTC.top, and when I did the work in October, he had 15% of the network's computational power. And he pretty much said the following: if there's a fork and Bitcoin Unlimited, goes his way and tries to become the new Bitcoin, he's willing to invest $100 million to kill Corecoin, to kill Bitcoin if it's a smaller fork. So, that's a lot of barking. And of course, this didn't happen in real life, but he did say it. And I'm pretty sure he does have $100 million reserved. So we do have wealthy adversaries out there who's willing to attack cryptocurrencies. And finally, we have a very good Twitter poll by Vitalik when I was making these slides in January. And it has 15,000 votes. And you have to take it with a pinch of salt because, it's Twitter. It's probably a bunch of bots voting for it or trying to make me send them ETH. But anyway, so what we can take away from this is that 35% of people in this poll said that they're willing to tolerate a 51% attack if it happens around once every 10 years or less than 10 years. And that's actually quite surprising. So 51% attacks in this community are somewhat expected and could be socially acceptable. Okay, so bribery again. So what about the state of the art? I'm obviously not the first person to think about bribery attacks. So there's 3 different papers that have all proposed different ways to do this. The first one is called a whale transaction. And it's fairly straightforward. I create a transaction with a very large fee. And this works better in Bitcoin than it does in Ethereum. Actually, I guess it works in Ethereum smart contract as well. But basically, I tell the miners I want them to do something. Maybe I want them to censor some transaction. And if they keep censoring the transaction, I'll send a transaction with a large fee and broadcast it to the network. And I'll keep doing this to ensure that transaction never gets in. Now, it's not trustless. So you either have to trust the briber to keep signing transactions, or you have to trust the bribe miner to keep censoring transactions. It also doesn't divert any hash rate away. So miners are still mining real blocks. And finally, is an in-band bribery attack. The next one is called a script puzzle. And I really like this one. This one's really cute. So basically, I create a contract or a transaction where if you solve a proof of work puzzle, you get to claim the reward. And the whole point here is that if the reward's high enough, miners will solve the puzzle in your transaction instead of the blocks. So you're basically diverting their hash rate away. If you get the network's hash rate to be smaller, then I need less hash rate to take over the network. And it's also trustless because you only have to trust the transaction or the contract that give out the reward. And it could be in-band or out-of-band. So basically, I could set up a smart contract with the proof of work algorithm for Bitcoin. Then Bitcoin miners can mine my smart contract. And finally, there's proof of stale block. And this one's basically an attack on a mining pool. And it works as follows. I'm a miner, and I'm working as part of a big pool. And I'm sitting there doing my proof of work, trying to make some money. Then I'm eventually very lucky, and I create a block. I have 2 choices. I either give my block to the pool master, and he broadcasts it out to the network, and then it gets in the blockchain. Or I can just keep it secret and not tell anyone about it. And then I wait an hour or 2. And after an hour, I'm guaranteed that my stale block will never get into the blockchain. And then what I do is I simply publish it to an Ethereum smart contract, and then I get rewarded for doing that. But the point here is that it's an attack on a mining pool, and it's not fully trustless because it's really difficult to prove or verify a Bitcoin block in Ethereum, basically because of the 1 megabyte size. It also diverts hash rate away. Because I'm mining stale blocks, my blocks never contribute to the overall weight of the blockchain. And it's out of band, which actually makes this attack quite viable. Okay, so what I'm going to propose is 3 different contracts. And our idea is that we want to remove all trust between the briber and the bribee. And I'm going to go through each contract one by one. The first one's called censorship con, where the briber wants to have full control over the blockchain in order to censor transactions. And one nifty trick in this attack is that we also use the Uncle Block reward policy to subsidize the attack. So we have Alice, and Alice is our very cute briber. This is really malice underneath. And basically she says to the miners, I want to take over the Ethereum blockchain, will you help me? And then she basically tells the miners, if you want to help me, please pursue an Uncle Block mining strategy. But what is an Uncle Block? Just in case people in the room aren't familiar. Effectively, an Uncle Block is the following. We have Block A and we have Block B, and they're both competing to get in the blockchain. Then somebody extends Block A. So Block A and maybe Block C, they become the longest chain. What would normally happen in Bitcoin is that Block B would be a stale block, it would be discarded, it would never get in the blockchain, and the miner would never get any reward. But in Ethereum, we have Uncle Blocks. So if you have a stale block that doesn't get in the blockchain, you can later include that as an Uncle Block. So as you can see here, that little blue thingy is B1. It got included as an Uncle Block in the longest chain. And the miner got 2.6 ETH for that. Now the point is that the sooner your Uncle Block gets in the blockchain, the higher reward you get. So if you have to wait 2 blocks, you get 2.2 ETH. If you wait 3 blocks, you get around 1.8 ETH. Okay, and there's also another consensus rule where every main block in the blockchain can only include up to 2 Uncle Blocks. So now that everyone is aware what an Uncle Block is, Alice basically tells the miners to do the following. Only mine Uncle Blocks and only extend my blocks. This way the network will help fund her attack. And I don't have enough time to go into the details of the full attack. I'm happy to talk about it afterwards if anyone's really interested. But the outcome is that the briber's going to create all the main blocks, and these blocks are what contain or have the transactions, and all the bribers will only create Uncle Blocks. And they'll be able to prove to a contract that they mined an Uncle Block, and they'll get a reward for that as well. Now, what's the point of this? Well, each Uncle Block will pay up to 2.6 ETH to the bribe miner, and the briber only has to pay the remaining block reward, which is something like 0.4 ETH, plus the bribe itself. So it's actually a really cheap bribery attack in a sense. And there's some caveats with this attack. So if you want to maximize your subsidy, so you pay as little as possible for this attack, the briber needs to have at least 25% of the hash rate. And that's because of that consensus rule where you're going to have 2 Uncle Blocks per block. If there's more than 2 Uncle Blocks per main block being created, then we have too many Uncle Blocks. And we can't include every Uncle Block in the blockchain. I've said blocks a lot, I'm sorry. There's a lot of blocks here. So effectively, not every miner could accept the bribe, but enough miners can accept the bribe where Alice can take full control over the blockchain. But if she has over 33% of the network's hash rate, then we get the perfect number of Uncle Blocks. And then every miner can accept the bribe, and everyone's better off doing this. And I think that's from Breaking Bad, the bribers and the miners. Okay, so the whole point of this attack is that it's trustless. The briber and the bribee only trust a smart contract. What's really cool is that we don't divert any hash rate away. So because of the Byzantine hard fork, all Uncle Blocks now contribute to the overall weight of the blockchain. So actually, the weight of the blockchain doesn't change at all, but everyone's better off because Alice is paying the bribers. And actually, if you play with the numbers well enough, the briber can make a profit doing this. But it is an inbound bribery, which makes it a little bit less realistic because, I mean, if you're attacking the cryptocurrency and being rewarded in it, there might not be any incentive to do that unless it's socially acceptable. Okay, history revision con. So the briber wants to reverse or remove transactions from the blockchain. And the only way you can do this is really by mining an alternative fork that's longer. So basically, Alice says to the miners, I want to reverse a transaction in Ethereum. Will you help me do this? And this is the way the attack works. So Alice has 3 different accounts. She has A1 that creates the bribery contract and will also fund the bribery contract. She has A2 that will spend some coins to the victim. And then she has A3 that will later receive the double spent coins. So to begin, Alice spends coins from A2 and she sends that to the victim. She waits in some type of confirmations. Eventually the victim's happy and they pay out the service or whatever, etc., etc. And then she says, okay, I now want to reverse this transaction. So she creates two different transactions. One is the double spend transaction that will send coins from A2 to A3. The second transaction sets up the bribery contract and funds it from A1. And she gives this to the miners. And then the miner audits the code, and he verifies himself that if he if he mines a new alternative fork, he will be rewarded via the contract. And then once he's convinced, he'll create the first bribe block, he'll include both transactions, and finally he'll include a third transaction where he just accepts the bribe. And this gets broadcast to the network, okay? So now, the contract will check the following. Was the contract created at block 2? Yes, it was. And did Alice perform the double spend? Did the coins get sent to A3? Yes, it did. And finally, did the bribe miner request his bribe payment? Yes, he did. So everything's happy. He got his bribe, the contract satisfied, that we're now on the new alternative fork. And then every time a miner creates a block, they can claim their bribe from the contract, and it eventually becomes the longest fork. And of course, we can also do that trick with the uncle blocks. So let's just say, if there's several miners mining this alternative fork, and then you have a different fork, we can actually include uncle blocks and reward those as well. So uncle blocks are subsidized in this attack. Now, as I mentioned, there's two modes of payment, every block and every uncle block. Now, this attack is all or nothing. Either we get the longest fork, and the bribe miners get their reward, or it fails, and the briber is refunded their coins. So again, there's no trust. And we can do more than just double spending. Double spending is a really corny example. It's basically the traditional eCash problem. But we can do a bit more than that. So if people had been fast enough, they could have saved the parity wallet. You create a contract that unkills the library and sets the owner to the rightful owners. But we could also go a bit further. If they still want to save the contract, you could set up a bribery hard fork smart contract, where if you mine on a hard fork, you could get maybe 20% of the locked up ETH. And that is very doable today. And of course, the miners won't have to trust the briber for doing this. I just thought I'd throw that out there. Again, it's trustless. It doesn't divert any hash rate away because we're still mining blocks. And we can still do the subsidy. And again, it's an in-band bribery. Although I don't think it has to be an in-band bribery. I think you can do that out of band as well. Finally, Goldfinger Con. And this is the one I'm most excited about. I got really excited about this when I thought of it. So basically, can Ethereum be used to reduce the utility of Bitcoin? So before I go into the details, what is a Goldfinger attack? So this was proposed at WISE 2013. And the idea is fairly straightforward. I'm really wealthy. I want to kill a cryptocurrency and make profit. So maybe I'll short Bitcoin. Then I'll do some nasty attack that crashes the value. Then I get the reward via the shorting I did via the exchange. But back in 2013, if you guys remember, we only really had Litecoin, maybe Dogecoin, we had Bitcoin. I don't think Dash was around. So there wasn't really that much competition amongst cryptocurrencies. There was no real incentive to do this. But today, going up to 2018, we have Bitcoin Cash, definitely competition there. We have Ethereum Classic, we have Zcash, Monero, et cetera, Because we have so many competing cryptocurrencies, at some point, we might want to try to kill some cryptocurrencies. And as we've seen at the very start of this talk, there was the wealthy adversary with $100 million willing to kill Corecoin. And he could have used this technique to do that. So basically, how do you reduce the utility of Bitcoin? And it's fairly straightforward. If you mine empty blocks, then no transactions ever get confirmed. The transaction fee will go up. Well, I guess it'll be no transaction fee because no transactions get in. And then you reduce the utility of it. But how do you verify an empty block? So a Bitcoin block header has 4 different components. It has the previous block hash, it has the timestamp, it has the Merkle tree root, and it has the nonce. So if this is an empty block, the Merkle tree root is simply replaced with the Coinbase transaction. That's the very first transaction in a block. So given the Coinbase transaction and given the Bitcoin block header, you can verify that this was indeed an empty block. So I got really excited. And then effectively what you do is you give out to the contract, and the contract can verify it as an empty block and pay you a reward. And I got really excited and built a proof of concept. It's only a corny little proof of concept I built in a few days, but it gives you a rough idea that it's around 56 cents in order to submit a block header, submit a Coinbase transaction, and accept your bribe from the contract. So this is really cost-effective to do and very gas-efficient as well. And I actually also maintain forks. So my little implementation can maintain different forks and et cetera, et cetera. So there are the 3 contracts. Goldfinger Coin is trustless. It doesn't divert any hash rate away. It's out of band, and there's no subsidy, unfortunately. That was a bit disappointing. But otherwise, it's a really cool contract. Now, for future work, typically for all these contracts, I've assumed the briber has already managed to convince enough miners to join the attack. It would be really cool to work out strategies in order to ramp up the attack. So if I start with 0% bribe miners, how can I incentivize them to join early? And how can I incentivize them to actually join the attack altogether? I'd also like to look at selfies mining. To see if selfies mining can be used both to improve the bribery attacks or to defend against the bribery attacks. You know, rational miners versus bribe miners. Who's going to win this war? And finally, can these bribery contracts be used in a proof-of-stake setting? And I think it's a bit of a dangerous combo. It's something I'm working on now where, and if you think about Bitcoin, for example, with proof of work, I have to buy hardware separately and then use different coins to bribe miners. But in proof of stake, I buy the voting rights, so I buy some stake, and this same stake can then be used to bribe the miners. So I only need 1 pool of coins to do that. And that's a bit of a quirk. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you like my meme. It's Ethereum killing Bitcoin. And thank you for listening. Oh, I can go now.
problème avec la presse. Le Tu l'as mis sur Drive, mais si tu passes pas par un shortener, ça bug quand même. Est-ce que l'URL shortener c'est juste pour raccourcir l'URL? Mais du coup. Mais sinon. De toute façon, avec les trucs centralisés, ça bug un jour ou l'autre.
De quoi?
Si tu fais comme ça, on va pas t'entendre, faut faire enfin, proche.
Il n'y a pas de. Bon, je vais essayer le micro. Test, test. Ouais. Ça va faire ça, ok. So, hi everyone. Today we're going to speak about graphing opportunities in Kleros. So we will start with a general description of graphing opportunities, and then we'll see example in the Kleros dispute resolution system. So what is griefing? The word comes from online gaming, when you have players which are making some action which is not beneficial to themselves, but which are harming others. So for example, in Minecraft, people putting dynamite to explode the construction of others. They won't win anything due to that, but they can harm others, be happy about them, trolling. So even if something is not beneficial to you, that does not mean that you will never do it. We'll have some fun game. So I put some smart contract which basically say if you send 0.01 ETH to it, you will destroy the content of the contract. And in this contract, I have 0.8 ETH in it. If no one destroys it, I will be able to get them back. So if you want, you can like make me lose money by losing a bit of money. The other contract asks you to send 0.1 ETH, and the other contract asks you to send 1 whole ETH to make me lose money. So how can you analyze that? If we analyze that with a normal form matrix, we can see that I don't have any choice to play. I'm in the presentation. I can't defend myself. But you can either send some transaction to the contract or not send anything. If you send a transaction, you will lose 1. In this case, it's 1 cent of ETH. And if you don't send anything, you don't lose anything. So for you, your optimum is clearly not to do anything. But perhaps someone wants to do it. It can be more or less problematic with griefing opportunities, depending to how much people has to pay to grief and how much harm is done. So we can analyze them with griefing factor, which is the ratio of the harm done to the cost of griefing. So why do people grieve? One explanation is bounded rationality. Basically, just people not knowing what their action will lead to. So we had this example with the Parity multisig wallet, where the library contract was destroyed by someone. So this someone destroyed the contract. He had to make 2 transactions to do it, which made him paid around like $1 worth of fee. And he destroyed $300 million worth of Ether in the contract which were linked to this library. So in this case, that's a 300 million griefing factor, which is really, really, really bad, even if we are just analyzing this possibility from a game theoretical point of view. No one has incentive to do it. You just pay transaction fee to gain nothing and destroy things for others. Why would you do that? One possible answer is because you just don't know the consequences of your action. Another possible explanation is the trembling hand, where basically you want to do something, but you do something else. So that's not completely crazy. That happened. That actually happened to me once by just having 1 extra digit in a transaction I was making. So luckily it was not Ether, it was mostly some test stuff, so that was fine. But sometimes people just miss what they want to do. One other example in the out-of-chain world is the Hawaii missile, where someone say, well, warn everyone that there is a missile. So of course he did not want it to do that, but he just clicked on the wrong button. Or just for fun, people sometimes just want to harm others because they like it. People have utility function which may seem strange or hard to analyze, but utility function of some people include the loss of utility in some other persons. Sometimes griefing cannot really be griefing because you may win a reward by doing it. It's just that it's an external reward. It's not a reward in the system we can analyze. So for example, the Shanghai attack, where people were making tons of transactions to slow down all the computers which were running Ethereum, you don't have any intra-system, you don't have any incentive in the Ethereum system to do that. You're just paying transaction fees to do nothing for you. But now, if you look out of the system, You can want to do that because you just short the Ether. So basically, you bet on the fact that the Ether is going to lower, and you make an action in the system to reduce the value of the system. You can have a competing system, and in this case, you get some competitive advantage, or you can be some government, and for some kind of reason, you don't want the centralized system to take over a huge part of the economy, and so you want to destroy them. So we still have no idea about why people made the Shanghai attack, and it could be multiple possibility I explained, but not by mistake, because it was something done for a long time, repeated. So in this case, it's clearly not a trembling hand or a bad Boolean rationality. So let's look at some example of griefing in blockchain protocols. So you have one honest party which want to pass a transaction in green. You put some gas price, and some dishonest party just want to prevent this party from having his transaction accepted in a block. What can he do? He can add tons of transactions which are doing nothing interesting except taking all the size of the block, and they have to put a higher gas price to make sure that these transactions are included by the miner, because the miner want to optimize the reward. What can the victim do about that? This victim can increase the transaction fees, the gas price is ready to pay, in order to go first in the order of the miner, inclusion in the block, and still be included in the block. But by doing that, you forced some other party to pay extra transaction fees. Sometimes just looking at griefing factor may not be possible to analyze this, and we want to use O notation in order to not have to deal with the whole small detail, but just deal with it at a constant and lower than a particular bounded value. In this case, what is the cost? You have to pay for the block size multiplied by the gas price that you put, and for the grief is in O of the attacker gas price. So O notation, it's not exact notation. That means that it's not exactly attacker gas price, because you also had the price that the sender of the transaction was ready to pay. In this case, the griefing factor is not that bad. It's 1 divided by the block size. So if you have really large block size, that's going to be super expensive to prevent someone from making a transaction or force him to increase the fees. But we could ask, well, can we just wait for the attack to pass? In this case, the victim can wait, and at some point the attacker will have to stop the attack, and the transaction is included. In this case, is there some grief? Yeah, there is still some grief, because time is money, and time money is also money. So what does it mean? It's like if you're receiving the transaction, your Ether are going to be delayed. And during the delay, you can't use your Ether, so you can't use them for staking, you can't use them to invest in some other productive activity. And for the sender of the transaction, is probably buying something. So for example, he's buying a computer. And if when you buy a computer, your computer arrival is delayed by 10 years, that's really bad, because 10 years after, the spec will not be relevant. You may have been dead in between. So people, their utility function, they prefer utility now than utility in the future. So in general, there is some special case where you make insurance and retirement, but in general, people will prefer to have something now than something in the future. So time grief is grief. In this case, it's still not a really problematic attack because the griefing factor is in O of the block size multiplied by the attacker gas price. So that's still really expensive to delay some transaction. So now let's look at a few examples in the Kleros dispute resolution system we are building. So this is not a talk to explain Kleros. You will have one the last day of the conference. But basically, we are building a dispute resolution system with crowdsourced juror and smart contract enforcement. Let's look at the fee structure. So let's take a simple case. You have Alice and Bob. Alice is contracting Bob to make a website, and she does not trust Bob, so she put money in a smart contract, and if Bob does the website, she can sign, and Bob can get the money. But in case something will go wrong, she can go to dispute resolution. First case, let's assume that the plaintiff has to pay the fee. So Alice has to pay the fee, it goes to dispute resolution, the arbitrator, the juror, they agree with Alice, so they rule in favor of Alice, Alice gets her money back, but Alice has paid 2 ETH of dispute resolution fees, so in this case, Bob has griefed Alice for free, which is very problematic because you can have bots or even a low-paid worker to destroy your marketplace by just going to all the people which require work and saying, yeah, okay, I will do it, I will do it, I will do it. Make a smart contract to me, and I will do it. And then never do it and make the employers lose money in dispute resolution. So now we can look at another fee structure when you ask both parties to pay half of the dispute resolution fee. In this case, if Bob refuses to pay the fee, is automatically losing the dispute, and Alice gets her money back, and no money is used for dispute resolution. In this case, it's a little better, because Alice, in this case, will lose 1 ETH, and Bob will also lose 1 ETH, so you have a griefing factor of 1, so it's not perfect, but that's a way better solution than what we had before. Can we do even better? Yeah, we can ask both parties to deposit the arbitration fees and reimburse the deposit of the winning one. So in this case, if you're honest, you don't lose anything. Is there still a grief? Yes, there is still some small grief because you lose time. In this case, Alice, if she's contracting Bob for a website, she's not contracting someone else for the website, so the website is delayed. And so that's still little grief, but not as problematic as we had before. Now let's look at what happened with an appeal system. In the case of Kleros, when you appeal, you can get more and more jurors. So now let's assume that the appeal price is going to be always the same. We ask both of them to deposit some appeal fee. And in addition, we ask Alice, in this case, because Alice is the appellant, to also put an extra stake, which will be used to compensate Bob for the time loss in the appeal would Alice lose. So we get more juror, but Alice can still do that again and again, and each time she's delaying the result of the dispute, which is gonna grief Bob in terms of time. In this case, we have O of 1 time griefing factor, which is okay-ish, but could be better. So now, to get a better griefing factor, so a lower one, let's look at what happens if we ask to double the dispute resolution fee every time we have an appeal, and then we put twice plus 1 the number of jurors on every appeal. So we increase more, way faster the amount of jurors and the amount of fees. Increase, and Alice ends up to pay way more on each new round. So in this case, we have a logarithmic amount of time which is lost compared to the amount spent in dispute resolution fees by Alice. Of course, assuming that Alice is going to lose a dispute. So this seems quite good because at the beginning you can bother, but at the end it starts to become so expensive to delay the result of the ruling that parties won't be able to grieve even if they want to. What's something interesting we can see is that sometimes griefing and attacking can be really close. Because now what if Alice keeps appealing and then Bob does not have enough money to put the appeal deposit? Bob will be considered as a loser. Alice will get back the amount of money in the dispute, plus her stake, plus the deposit. So Alice will not have lost anything except perhaps a bit of time for herself. So to prevent this griefing attack to be turned into a real attack where the attacker gets some benefit of it, we need a post-dispute insurer. So in this case, if Bob is not able to pay to deposit this appeal fee, he can ask some post-dispute insurer to deposit the appeal fee instead of him, and the post-dispute insurer will get the extra stake which were normally used to compensate Bob's loss of time. So what do we need to remember on this small example? It's mostly about system design, mechanism design. Because when you are building a blockchain system, will it be for blockchain, will it be for a decentralized application, you are making the rules. That's quite exciting compared to the outside world where you are bound by the rule of physics, the rule of government, the rule of previous organization. In this case, you can really decide almost everything as long as it's computationally feasible to apply those rules. If we look at those two design possibilities, on the left one, where you have a really high griefing factor, but when there is no grief, the victim will not lose anything, compared to the right one, with a small griefing factor. So in this case, the victim will lose 1 if the griefer pays 1, but the victim loses 1 every time. So just analyzing it from a rational game theory point of view won't be enough, because if you assume every party to be rational, no one will ever grieve, so you will always be in the bottom, and in this case, it's way better to always be at 0, 0 than to always be at 0, -1. But we've seen that people may not be always rational. We've seen that you can't analyze everything in your system because people have out-of-system incentives. And so in this case, you really want to lower the amount of harm that someone can do compared to what it costs to them. So let's finish this presentation with this little game. And I don't know if someone griefed me. Did someone grief me? If someone griefed me, you can like raise the hand, unless you want to stay anonymous. Well, I don't have any griefer. Well, sometimes people are nice, but you may not also be enough to have some really bad people among you. Or perhaps the stake is not high enough. Or perhaps you just analyze my utility function by thinking, well, if I grief him, he will be able to speak about it. So it will increase his utility. And so in fact, I will not grief him. So I don't know why you did not grief me. But people have some reason, people are not rational, and we want to prevent them from doing harm when they can do it. Thank you.
Chercher.